We do echo Brother Mark's prayer. Lord, take our words. May they come out in such a way that they will be a blessing and a benefit. We praise you in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Got a good lesson today. I feel very, very inadequate in being able to get it across, but it's got some good points. It's talking about being inclusive. Now, you know, up to this time, and to start with, Jesus and his disciples were basically just going to the Jewish people. By this time, the Jewish people had the idea that since they were God's chosen people, they were only one really qualified to ever receive God's blessings. They didn't think the Gentiles would ever be able to be a part of God's family. But in today's lesson, Mark chose a couple of incidents that shows that Jesus will work with the Gentiles. And he opened up the door to all of the Gentile people, and that means anybody that's not a Jewish person. And that includes, I guess, probably all of us. Jesus did not limit his mercies just to those of the children of Abraham. And we can be so very thankful to that. Now, anybody who will turn to Christ and accept him as the Son of God and receive forgiveness of sins is qualified to be a part of the family of God. Now, our lesson is from Mark chapter 7 and 8, and there is so much in that I don't know if I can even cover even a part of it. I probably did. A lot of things I used to do, I can't or don't do anymore. Now, in this lesson, considering the people that Jesus was dealing with, we find that they were a lot of times excluded from certain activities, certainly since they were non-Jewish. I imagine there's been times in all of our lives that we felt shut out or excluded. And I've heard Dorothy talk about whenever she was a young girl, she was a great ball player. And she would be among the very first persons chosen on the team, be mostly boys, but she was a girl. And she could hit that ball like a lot of those other guys couldn't. So they chose her. But I've been on the receiving end of, I'm never much of an athlete, when they'd be choosing up teams and I'd be chosen down toward the end of the line because they knew I didn't have that much ability. I got about as much real rhythm as a head of lettuce, so I never learned how to dance. I'm just not athletic. But whenever I was in physical education one year, I happened to be in a PE class at the same time as the football team. And I always kind of chuckled and was a little bit afraid because they'd line me up. Here I am, maybe 125 pounds, right in front of a 250-pound blocker. All I could do, he'd just shove me aside or I'd have to just get out of the way. We're not all qualified for everything. And sometimes we don't get to participate in certain things because of inabilities of different kinds. It could be athletic, could be singing. I know Dorothy's dad a few times, and I try to sing with them on occasion. And he has said, and I hopefully not applied to me, of course, that he'd be talking about a particular person. He'd say, I used to wish I could sing now. I wish they could. Surely that wasn't meant for me, but I think I got the lesson anyway. Everybody has capabilities and areas that we're not capable of. For example, what about physical disabilities? Now, in our church community, we have folks who don't hear as well as others. And I hope Dorothy will forgive me, but a lot of times around the house, if I'm behind her and I say something, she doesn't hear me, or she doesn't understand it. And even here in church, she probably does not hear half of what's said, especially if you're soft-spoken. And I know Brother G.W., sorry to pick on you too, but I know you got hearing problems. And I know Brother Jack Rainey had severe hearing disability. Now, when a person can't hear, they miss out on a lot of things. They miss out on some of the birds singing. They miss out on some of the teaching or the ministering of the word. There are other types of disabilities. Now, in today's lesson, there's this one guy who not only was deaf, he couldn't hear, but he couldn't speak plainly. He had a speech impediment. And it could be that he was stuttering or slurring. We don't know, but he had a double problem there. And Jesus had this man was brought to him, and the Lord dealt with him. And we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. But what about folks who have intellectual or mental disabilities? See, a lot of times they are shut out from the church. Either their behavior doesn't conform to what everybody expects, or they may interrupt in some ways, and it's not something they have a control over. But because of that, a lot of times their caregivers, whether it's parents, family, or whatever, will just keep them at home. And so people with disabilities a lot of times lose out on the opportunity of coming to know the Lord and of learning more about Him. And this is an area of ministry that most churches, I think, are neglectful about. I admire Angie because of the way she has worked with people that have disabilities, as a caretaker. It takes a special love and ability to be able to work with folks who are different in some ways. Now, we're going to look in this chapter 7. There's two main points that Mark covers. And we're going to kind of emphasize that. But leading up to that, Jesus was having increasing conflicts with the Pharisees. It says in the very beginning of chapter 7, some of the Pharisees were beginning to criticize him because his disciples didn't always wash their hands before they ate. And according to certain Jewish rituals, you have to do this and that, and to eat with unwashed hand makes the food unclean. And they were complaining that Jesus wasn't upholding the letter of the law. Jesus could see that by their emphasis on these little details, they were overlooking the weightier matters. And so they were following traditions, but not necessarily everything that was in the Word of God. And they had reached the point, and a lot of times we do too, of where it's more important to follow a method of doing things. And I heard Robert Jeffress talking on his program this week. I think it was Robert Jeffress. Might have been, what's his name, Robert Morris. But anyway, we were talking about people getting so upset over certain things. Said whenever he was first called to be a pastor of a church, that church had a routine where they sung the doxology just before they'd take up the offering. Being a young, uneducated minister in a way, he decided to move the doxology to the end of the service. And he said that created such an uproar, he thought he was denying the virgin birth or something. People got so upset over it. And then he was talking a little bit later about there's some churches that if they don't have a wooden pulpit like this, it's not godly. He said, Lord, don't let them ever have a plexiglass pulpit. Said he actually knew of a church or two that had split over what kind of pulpit they were going to have. We get so wrapped up in our own human wishes and desires and preferences that it overshadows a lot of times the weightier things of God. And Jesus was telling these Pharisees there now that you say this is so important to wash hands, and yet you take another part of the law where you're supposed to be caring for your parents, and you pledge that part that you would care for their parents to the temple to donate to them, and that relieves you of the obligation to take care of your parents. And he's saying it's so foolish for you to follow one thing and not follow another thing. Now, his disciples still didn't understand all of these things that he was trying to teach them like this. They were a little bit slow on understanding. They saw the miracles. They saw the feeding of the 5,000 like it was last week. They had seen Jesus cast out demons, seen him heal people, and when he sent them out, they had participated in the same type of thing. And yet when it come to other little details, their faith just seemed like disappeared. You know, it's that way with us. Sometimes our faith is up, sometimes it's down. But that doesn't mean God won't do the same thing, because he doesn't change. Now, as a part of this, chapter 7, it's not really covered in our lesson, but it's so very important, I think. And I'm going to be looking in verses 14 through 22. You know, the Pharisees had been rebuking him because of not washing hands. And he was trying to explain to the disciples and to them that it's not what goes into a person. It's not the food you eat or the drink you have necessarily. Of course, we're warned to get strong drink. That's not what defiles a man. What defiles a person is what comes from the heart. It's what is inside the person that comes out. And it says even in the days of Noah, the people were doing and thinking nothing but evil continually. And here in this, Jesus telling them, do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him? Because it does not enter the heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated. This purifies all foods. What comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, blasphemy, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, foolishness. All these things come from within and defile a man. So it's how you are in your heart. That's going to be revealed in what you say and what you do. And so that's the part that Jesus wanted to address. Now, a lot of times whenever he'd perform miracles, the people would look at the miracles and say, oh, he's a great miracle worker, he's a wonderful man. And they'd want to go and see what was going on, or they'd want to participate in the healing part of it. But Jesus sometimes told the people, don't tell anybody what we've done here. Like the man you mentioned, Brother G.W., where he healed him, and he told him at one point, don't say anything to anybody else. Well, you know what he did. He went and told everybody he could find. There was a time in the ministry of Jesus, especially early on, when Jesus did publicize his miracles, like the healing of the Gadarene that was in the graveyard, and he delivered him from the demons, and he said, go tell the people. Now that was to help bring notice to his ministry that he was representing the power of God. But there were other times, after he became pretty well known, where the healings became a distraction. Jesus had a greater purpose than just healing. Now we're told healing is available to us today. But the greater purpose is healing of the soul. And that's what Jesus wanted to focus his ministry on, was spreading the good news that a person could be cleansed and healed spiritually and made right with God. And a lot of times people came to him just for the ministry of the healing. Now, some of you are as old as I am, and you might remember Oral Roberts' ministry. There are others, W.V. Grant, which you may not know because he was in another denomination. And there were a lot of others that had vibrant, effective healing ministries. And they would attract thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And great work was done. But a lot of times the people came to see the healings rather than to listen to the message. And the most important thing is the message of Jesus Christ. Now let's look at this first incident here. Jesus had gone into a different area. He left the area of Jerusalem. It says here in verse 24, from there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now this was a Gentile area. There were some Jewish people that lived there, but it was predominantly Gentile. And he might have thought that, if he went into this area, he could avoid the crowds. But wherever he went, a crowd showed up. It says here he went into a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. And amongst those that came was a woman, a Greek, a Gentile, a non-Jew, who had a daughter that had an unclean spirit. And I don't know exactly what the manifestations were of that. You might remember another incident when there was a little boy who would have spells. His dad said it's thrown him into the fire, and different types of things like that. But this woman came to Jesus. She wanted him to heal her daughter. Said a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. And she kept asking him, cast the demon out. She just kept on. She was persistent. She knew enough about Jesus to know that he had the power and the authority of God to deliver her daughter. And I can just imagine that the daughter, being a young girl, probably had something like we might think of as epilepsy, or perhaps a mental disorder of some kind. Most everything that went on that they didn't understand, they attributed to an unclean spirit. And a lot of people today are the same way. If there's an affliction, it's due to a certain demon's attack. It may or may not always be the case. But she wanted Jesus to deliver her daughter. And it looks like Jesus gave her an insult. You remember what he told her? I must go to the children of Israel first. It's not right to throw the children's food to the dogs. Jewish people referred to Gentiles as dogs. They didn't want nothing to do with them unless if they could avoid it. And that sounds like a real serious rebuke. But the authors of our lesson today point out that the word Jesus used in talking to this lady was not the word for a wild or mongrel dog. It was a term applied to a family pet, a puppy. And you can imagine, you got dogs, and once in a while the dog might hang around under the table hoping somebody will drop a little bit of something. And that's the kind of situation he was talking about here. He's saying the food first belongs to the children of the Lord. And she knew automatically, just like you and I do, that you don't feed the dog first and feed the leftovers to the kids. You do the opposite way. Unless you're like us and you don't usually give your dog people food. However, we've made a little exception to that because our dog loves crackers and certain types of chips. And every time we sit down at the table, she's going to come up and sit there and beg. And all she wants is these little square saltines. She loves them. So we made some exceptions there. First have to go to the children of Israel. But the lady, you remember her response? Even the dogs or even the puppies get to eat the crumbs that fall from the table. Remember, she was a Gentile. She wasn't a Jewish person, but she lived close enough to the area to be familiar with some of the Jewish laws and rituals, I'm sure. And she recognized that it was very unusual for her, a woman, first off, to approach a Jewish man. Second, a non-Jew to expect some blessing from God here. But she said, Lord, even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. She called him Lord. She acknowledged his divine status. And he said, because of this statement and your faith, your demon has gone out of the daughter. And when she got home, she didn't doubt, she didn't argue. She went back home to her daughter and found the daughter lying on the bed. Now imagine this might have been the first time that the daughter had had peaceful rest for a while. She was calm and restful, maybe sleeping, but the demon was gone because of her faith. How many times do we miss out on God's miraculous power? Because first, we don't ask for a great healing, and secondly, we don't really believe it would happen if we did. And if we don't believe it's going to happen, it's not going to happen normally. All right, so that's one incident here that Mark was telling us about. And it shows us that the blessings of God are made available to all people, not just God's selected nation of Israel, not just the children of Abraham, but to everybody, you and me and our friends and our loved ones. Everybody has access to the one true God through Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus was in this area, like it says, the region of Tyre and Sidon. And from there, he left, and it says in verse 31, again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came